Hi, this is Alexander. Welcome back to my channel. Let's get right into it. As you know, with current situations in the world, I was not able to go to Japan last year for a holiday. So, I'm just going to make my own Yukata/kimono type robe. I scoured all the major pattern company websites and some non-major to find a robe that would possibly work for me. Now, this is a woman's garment. Whatever. As you can see here, I'm going to be using red satin and black satin for this McCall's M7790. The black satin will be the trim, the red the body. With satin, it can be a slippery and difficult fabric to sew. I'm using the sharpest needles I could find, these Microtechs. I know you could use universal, but I'm not going to. So, I'm just going to put this brand new needle into my machine. When working with a fabric like satin, it's always better to use a brand new needle. This way, you won't have any tags or snares. Now that the brand new needle is in, we just need to do a little tension test just to make sure the new needle works through the fabric. And here we go, looks pretty good. Now it's on to cutting. As mentioned before, the red satin will be the base, so I'm just pinning that down now. Once everything is pinned down, it's time to do our notches and tailor's tacks. Two things you should never ignore. That gives you a lot of information, so again, always put in your notches and your tailor's tacks. Now for this robe, it calls for having pockets. I personally am not going to be putting in the pockets. I would rather have a belt to pockets. So what I'm going to be doing is just not adding pockets and just sewing that seam all the way down. But first, we need to have belt loops. This is just some fabric folded over twice. For the placement of this belt loop, I'll be putting it at the notch in the side seam. This is slightly below the tailor's tack for the pocket. This works well because where your hands would be to go into a pocket, the belt loop should be. This is just about at my waist anyway. You may need to adjust if you're doing this as well. But again, I'm putting it at the notch and just pinning it in place. And once pinned in place, I am going to follow the sewing guide and the seam allowance, in this case 5/8 of an inch, and sew from the markings at the top of the sleeve or underneath the sleeve all the way down to the marking where I can stop sewing. I'm using a zigzag stitch here just to keep the edges from fraying. Normally, I would have my serger with me. In this case, I don't. But here, I'm just using a zigzag stitch just to keep everything nice together. Shoulder seams are next, and again, we're going to do them the exact same way we did the side seams. Matching up our seam allowances, sewing all the way down, then going back and just doing a basic zigzag stitch. Again, if you have a serger, this might be a time for you to use your serger. This pattern calls for a lining. As I'm not going to be putting in the lining, This armband situation was a little tricky. If you are putting in a lining, it makes way more sense. Actually, if you weren't putting in a lining, like I wasn't, there's an easier way of doing this, but I want to stay as true to the pattern as possible. So here I am, pinning the armband along the shortest side, and then sewing down that edge. Once that was done, I'm just going to open up that seam allowance and pin it. I like to pin my seam allowances open, keeps them nice and flat. And in the pattern, it calls for 5/8 of an inch turn under. What I'm going to do here is what I normally do when you do turn unders. Do a basting line all the way around where I need to turn under. This gives me a nice fold that I don't have to necessarily use when pressing an iron. As you can see here, all the way around, and that gives me my little fold that I can turn under later. In fact, I'm going to do that now and pin that all into place. See how nicely it folds there? I don't have to get my iron out. I don't have to do any sort of fussing. This way it's just turned under and I can pin. I will say, since this is satin, use sharp pins. Sharp pins just work better. Now we have to match the non-turned underside to the actual garment. In this case, we are doing wrong sides to wrong sides and at that little split opening there. As you can see here, I'm delicately pinning at that point first, and then I'll be pinning all the way around, making sure to match those notches. Do not be a naughty notch ignorer. Once pinned all the way around, this is what we have. And we're going to start sewing from that little gap. That gap is 5/8 of an inch, conveniently. And we're going to sew all the way around. Notice I have lots of pins. Again, satin can be fussy and you may need lots of pins. So let's go over to the machine and start sewing at our 5/8 inch seam. As you can see here, all the way around. Once sewing all the way around has completed, it's time now to turn this. This was a fascinating moment. So now that we have our band basically facing outwards, we're going to take it, obviously make sure that you have no ripples and or binding, and we're going to fold it over. As you can see here, this makes a nice cuff. So you're going to match that fold over line to the sewing line that you just did and then pin. Make sure, again, lots of pins. Pin all the way around, and this is what you have. A nice self-enclosed cuff. Actually, self-enclosed on both sides. Oops, don't catch anything. So, what do we need to do now? Is now we need to take this to the sewing machine and sew. At the sewing machine, I always start under the arm. This way, if you have any issues, it won't be so noticeable. Also, we are sewing at a 1/8 inch top stitch there. Don't forget to take your time and go slowly. You do not want any puckers or binding in this cuff. Black satin, or any satin, is unforgiving. And there you go, 1/8 inch around. Now, it looks a little puckery, but that's okay. I will be able to iron that out. It's not actually because it's caught anywhere. It's just because of the way the fabric is moved through my machine. We're going to move on to the bottom contrast bands. These are the bands on the bottom and side of the robe. Let me show you here. As you can see, the bands, and I'm doing contrast black, this is what it should look like. So here's one of those pieces, and there's a tailor's tack there for you to reinforce that corner. If it says to reinforce a corner, you reinforce the corner. And I'm just putting in, not necessarily a basting stitch, but a regular stitch here about 1 inch or 2 from that mark in either direction. This will secure and stabilize the corner. And you may ask, why do we need to stabilize the corner? Well, that's because we're going to be clipping into this corner. The next part of the instructions tells us to match the corners, then sew, back tack, and sew to the tack line. This will create a large point as per the instructions. Now, trimming our extra threads, we're going to clip in straight across there. We will also need to clip away excess bulk. And just like the armband, there is a turn under. I pre-did that with stitching, makes it easier, and I'm just going to pin that as a turn under. That way I don't have to necessarily iron everything. So again, go along the bottom contrasting. If you're following along in the instructions, it will make more sense. But here we go. Everything is going to be nicely pinned, turned under, even at those corners, which we just did. And you'll see why you need to remove all that bulk. So there you go. The corners are all done. It's all open. Everything is pinned into place, making your nice little triangle points. And now we need to add that contrast to the bottom. This will take time. It also can be slightly frustrating. So, again, make sure you have lots of pins. Here I go, pinning the bottom, and that is what it's going to look like. Now I pinned all the way along. You're making sure you're doing the non-turned underside to the edge. And you're also pinning the right side of the contrast to the wrong side of the satin. Again, this is unlined. If you're doing the lining, it would make more sense. But since we're doing it this way, we're just going to take it to a machine, and we're going to sew on the right side facing up of the red satin. This will catch the black satin underneath. Go slow. This does take time. You do not want any ripples or puckers. Satin is very unforgiving. So, once we have started sewing all this, making sure that you go to the corners properly. The corners are the most difficult part. Once it's all sewn on, we're going to take it and flip it over. See how that flips over nicely to the right side. We're just going to flip along that sewing, making sure to clip any corner, remove any bulk. There's that corner we reinforced. You're going to nice and gently take out that corner, roll it over. You may need to press to get that seam open, finger press or with an iron, and we are just going to pin that down. Once all the pinning is done, we are going to sew, like we do with the arm cuff, 1/8 inch away from the edge. Notice how we're doing it on the edge that matches the red to the black, not the edge of the garment itself. This will create better flow later. Also watch on this corner, there is a lot of bulk there. Go slowly as I am here. Again, 1/8 inch. As the neck is a curved area, you're going to want to put in some stay stitching. You don't want that neck to stretch all out of place. And being satin, it most likely will. So, again, use a tighter stay stitching, just so you are safe, let's say. We are going to start off by sewing the neckband to the front band pieces, again using the seam allowance of 5/8 of an inch. And because this area is interfaced, it does make it slightly easier. Again, if it says to interface, there is a reason why. Always interface where appropriate. And naturally, because there's a turn under here again, we're going to do that. Matching up the seam allowance, sewing all the way down with this plain straight stitch so that we can turn under afterwards. That way you don't really have to go to the iron and try to iron a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Once we have done all that, we're going to take our 4 neckband pieces, putting them right sides together and sewing on the opposite side to where we did the turn under stitching. Basically making a full color piece that we're going to turn over. Now the 2 neckband and front band pieces. Now look, open it up, and there you go. You have the neckband almost ready. You'll see the turnover stitching. Again, we will be using this later. Now it's time to attach to the jacket, making sure to match the proper notches. Again, do not be a naughty notch ignorer. This will take time as this is a curved area. So look for the notches, find them, and just line those up first. And once you find that notch and you pin there, it's time to pin the neck all the way around. And you will end up with something like this. Lots of pins in place. This will keep the neck nice and secure when you take it over to the sewing machine, which we'll do now. At the sewing machine, we're going to first start by doing the bottom. As you can see here, I'm just going to trim off a little excess of the interfacing, and also notice that I have one edge of the turnover done. I'm going to sit there, make sure it's all nicely lined up, and sew along that bottom edge. This is important for later when we're turning, that will encase the bottom of the robe, so there will be no rough edges. Now, we're going to do the sewing all the way around. So we're just going to sew all the way around the neckline. Take your time with this. Again, it's curved and satin. Make sure you have no puckers. You want to go slowly. Once you've done that, there you go. Now, because we sewed the right sides to right sides, we turn to the wrong side, as you can see here. And as before with the arm cuff and the armband, we just need to pin everything in place. And this will take time again. This time though, because you turned to the wrong side, not the right side, you are pinning on the wrong side or the inner side of the robe. As you can see here, many pins will help. This is the front side, so you may need to pin on that side too. And when I mean about 4,000 pins, this is what it looked like. And now it's time to start sewing. I'm sewing from the right side. You could sew from the wrong side if you're skilled like that. I like the right side. Again, I'm using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. And look, it does capture on the other side. So that way I don't have to worry. Again, this robe was made for lining, but I wanted to keep as true to the pattern as possible. Making a belt is not hard. 2 thin rectangles sewn together, right sides together, sew, 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 leave an opening for turning, bip, bap, bop, belt. So, let's move on. Once we've finished everything, it's time to do a fashion show. There you go. I hope you liked this video. Please leave me comments below. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the thumbs up like button. It really helps. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Comments anything of that nature. Happy sewing. Bye now.